And good evening, church. It's good to see you here tonight. I'm glad you could be here. It's been a little bit since we've done discussion groups, and so we want to take advantage of that opportunity, and I hope you're looking forward to it. Now, with that in mind, if you are visiting, what that means is we'll start off and complete our worship service. We're going to have a sermon, and we're going to dive into God's Word, and we're going to worship Him that way. There will be communion and such offered if you've not yet had the opportunity to take it. After those things are done, we will then go into various discussion groups throughout the building. Alan Bush will lead the one that is here in the auditorium. Rodney Sills will lead one that will be upstairs in the multi-purpose room. And then I will be with one that's in the ladies' classroom. And so those are certain options for the adults. And then there are the kids' classes that will also be done as well. Mary Johnson will be handling the elementary school kids, and there will be one for the younger kids too, and I'm not sure who's doing that, but it's going to be done. And if you raise your hand, yeah, okay, we'll find you. And then Andrew's going to be taking care of James is here, ha-ha. I didn't know you were going to be here, but that was a dramatic, so yes, good to see you, Jama. And then Andrew's going to be handling the middle school and teenage class as well. So a lot of options for that, and you can find a place that best fits for you. And one of the reasons we love them is the chance to talk. Sometimes you have questions, you don't feel comfortable in a big room asking those questions. I know some of you are not shy at all and you are comfortable in any of those situations, but sometimes a little smaller group, you may feel more comfortable to ask questions and share thoughts. And we appreciate each other's experiences in that. There's things that you're going to come at and approach it that I would not think of, and I appreciate your wisdom. We have to be able to learn from one another. So in this discussion time period, when we kicked off last week, we're talking about the value of faith and reason. Today we live in a world where some people say that religion, there's really no space for reason or thinking or academics or intellectualism, and some people get uncomfortable with it and they avoid it like the plague. It's not their world. There's some people that say that the only thing that dictates your religious beliefs are your emotions or your feelings about something, and they may even go further and say, you know what, you have your truth and I will have my truth, and we will just go about it that way. There's a part that feels okay about that. It feels that way. But when we stop and think about it, we can't agree that two completely opposing things are both right. Doesn't mean we have to hate each other. In fact, that is kind of ridiculous. But it does mean we have to accept that there are some things that are true. And that is a thing that we want to explore as we look at our faith. Truth. Are there things that we can know? And how do we know them? It's nothing too complicated. Like I said last week, we used a couple of the big words and phrases, and we'll stick with one of the classical ideas and principles of logic this week. Again, the law of non-contradiction. That'll be a focus tonight. But it's not that complicated. And in fact, it's something that we use all the time. It's an order and it's a structure that God has given us. We would take that position, but that exists in such a way that we use it to reason out life. We certainly wouldn't go through every aspect of life and say, well, no, there's no logic or structure. There's no truth involved in that. You would never do it. Let me give you a minor example. Baseball cards. And if it's not your thing to collect baseball cards, any other collectible you can think of. Maybe it's cars you collect. Maybe it's Pokemon cards you collect. Maybe it's the more refined people who collect comic books. Blessings to you people. Whatever it is, you think before you purchase. This is the 1954 Hank Aaron rookie card, number 128 out of Topps. This is a rated card that is a condition of 9. It is also the record for this card, and it's sold for over $700,000. Now, before you pony up $700,000, you're going to want to know if that's truly the card you want. Some guy could come up and say, I feel like I got the card, and you'd say, not good enough. Someone say, but you know what? You can believe it's not, but I believe it is, but let's still make this transaction. You would say, no, thank you. You would check for facts to verify, to authenticate. You would need to know that the color is the correct on the card. You would need to know, has it been centered correctly? You would need to know, have the corners been bent? You would need to know, are the fonts correct? Is the information correct? You would probably go through an expert when you're dealing with a $700,000 card and get it confirmed, verified, because you know one thing is true. It cannot be the card and not be the card at the same time. That's a thing we don't even have to think about. You do it in everyday life all the time. It's a thing that we know it's to be a truth and we accept it, and it's a guide, an ordered, structured guide that we use to make decisions. That is an example of the law of non-contradiction. It can't be the card and not the card at the same time. This is a thing that it isn't the first time we exist, and we can't say that we, the people of the 21st century, or even frankly the people all the way back that simply defined it. They didn't discover it, they defined it. All the way back to Aristotle and those classical teachers of logic back then. And it is a classical one of the big ones. It predates it. Let's go to the Bible. Go to Genesis chapter 2. And that's really the beginning, isn't it? In humans and such, we are going back and we're going to see that it was a thing that existed then. And the reason we need to know this is because it's a tool. It doesn't give us the answer. It doesn't necessarily give us the truth, but it's a thing that we know that can get us there. A tool that we can use. And we appreciate tools to come to some level of truth. In Genesis chapter 2, God is talking about creation, and there's some amazing things about creation. Created the light, he created the land, he created the sea, and eventually he gets to this point where he creates mankind, and he loves mankind. I mean, it's a special relationship that he gives him. He creates him in his image. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 to 27. God said, let us make man in our image. But then there's this one element that me personally, I think is a real indicator of love. He gives man choice. And the way that he does this is by communicating a law. God communicates to mankind. And the intention of that is that mankind would understand the law, comprehend the law, and be able to make decisions, choices on whether or not he would obey the law. Already we can see that there is structure and order and expectation in the midst of that. This is God, the Creator, unfolding this in this particular account. And this is the law that he gives them in Genesis chapter 2. Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. This is what God spoke to Adam and Eve. And again, the expectation was that they could know it, they could understand it, they could comprehend it, and then they could choose whether or not to obey it, understanding consequence. There was a logic to it, and God gave them the ability to reason this out, which again helps us understand that there's a connection between faith and reason. If you jump over in chapter 3, we can really see this tested. The serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, has God indeed said you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. The fact that she could repeat back what God says meant that she heard God and she understood God and she comprehended what God said. She even knew the consequence of what he had given. So there was an order and a structure of communication showing that when God communicates to us, there is success in that. It's just a normal thing. We probably don't even think of this when we read the story. We're just like, yep, he spoke. Yep, she repeated it back. Of course. But what's really going on is God spoke and intended for us to understand, and that happened. And there's a logic and a structure to that so that we can comprehend. And our faith is deeply impacted by our ability to reason those things. But then the serpent comes into the mix. He tries to mess things up a little bit. He wants her to put her focus on that fruit. Now, we don't know what the fruit looked like. So I picked pictures that are some fruit. I couldn't even tell you what this is. Scott King asked me, is that real fruit? And I said, that's funny, given we're talking about truth. I don't know. I don't know. And in this day of computer-generated images and stuff, I honestly don't know. But it is purchased from a stock website, and I would probably try that, I guess, unless God said not to. Let's be clear, since we're in the garden. So the serpent then speaks to the woman, and he says, you will not surely die. Can you imagine hearing that? You've heard and comprehend and understood exactly what God had said, and you know the consequence, and you know you do because you can repeat it back, and you can even share that information with someone else, in this case the serpent. And the reply is to cast doubt. To cast doubt on what God, your creator, the one who loves you and provides for you, has said. To cast doubt. You shall not surely die. For God knows in the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Well, here we have a problem. We have a logic problem, don't we? We have a situation unfolding where we need reason and we need faith to discern what is right and what is good and what is wrong. It's not a complicated one, but we see that it has very big implications. We'll start very simple in the midst of this. God, on the one hand, said, if you eat, you will die. Serpent said, if you eat, you will not die. Both of these sentences cannot be true at the same time and in the same sense of relationship. It's a law of non-contradiction. Both of these statements cannot be true in the same sense and in the same relationship and the same time. So if we're talking about the same kind of death, okay. If we're talking about the same time period, okay. So it's not tricky wordplay. Both of them are establishing very clear certainties. Certainties. If you eat, there's a choice, you will die. And if you eat, you will not die. The parameters are pretty tight, not a lot of wiggle room. One's going to be true and one's going to be false. Now, you've read the story. You may have even read up through Genesis chapter 5 recently, which is a fascinating chapter given that it tells the genealogy from Adam to Noah. And in that genealogy, it clarifies, well, they died. They died physically. Adam lived to be 900 and plus years, 930, I believe. They had full lives, long lives, 900 and something years for sure. But physically, they did die. Spiritually, there was also a horrific consequence. Though they lived in the garden in a very close relationship with God, because they had disobeyed and because they had ignored, there was a real consequence. His words carried real meaning. There was a truth to be understood in the midst of this. They were cast out of the garden. Romans chapter 5, starting in verse 12 and a little bit further on, points out to us that Adam, in his actions here with Eve, set a precedent that is true for all mankind. When we are engaged with the choice based on God's law, we have a decision to make that is a combination of faith and reason. Faith, because if we know what God says and we comprehend what God says and we believe what God says and we trust what God says, then we need to obey what God says. Faith. But that's not an isolated emotions only thing. There is reason to that. Reason to it. And if God gave the reason, and because there's a multitude of factors that would play into this, and we can discuss those further in our discussion groups, if our ability to come to this is not primarily emotion, but there's reason in the midst of this, well, we'll make a faith decision. We'll make an obedient decision. We'll make a true decision. We'll make something that leads us to God rather than pushes us away. What they set up is the fact that we can be tempted, yes. We do have desires, yes. But we have a choice to either give in to those that lead us away from God, or we stand up for truth. We stand with God. We stand for life as opposed to death. There's implications involved in this, and this is really where we'll close up here and we'll move in towards our discussion groups. There's a lot to discuss with it. And I know we're talking already with the assumption that God exists, and we're moving to that further, but really what we're doing today is trying to establish that there is logic, there is truth, and these are tools that we can use when discussing the gospel. In fact, they're incredibly valuable tools. We can't compromise on them. There are people that will challenge us in that and try to get us to cast this aside in order to disprove God, so they believe, or cast aside the value of the Bible. But God gave us logic. He gave us brains. He wanted us to think things through. And the implications of this from this story is that there is truth. There is truth. Even the statement itself that if a thing cannot be itself and not itself at the same time and in the same sense or relationship, that is a truth. It makes some people uncomfortable because we can't scientifically verify it. And there's names for all that sort of thing as well. But it is a truth, and we use that all the time to sort through our lives. It's almost like breathing to us to make right decisions, where we wouldn't even ask ourselves why we would compromise it. Why would we do that in religion as well? Especially with something so important as your relationship with God. Don't compromise truth, and don't let someone tell you there's not objective truth. It can be reasoned out, your faith. It deeply affects your faith, your ability to reason. I know sometimes your faith is strong because you have a great passion and that pushes it along, and sometimes it's because you have incredible knowledge, and sometimes it's incredible trust. But all of these are an amazing factor. And when we talk about apologetics, when we talk about defending the faith, our intellectual capacity is very important. The more you know the Bible, the better you're going to understand it, and the better you'll be able to defend it. The more you understand the way that logic works, which comes from God, that reasoning works, the greater skill you're going to have. And we really want to equip ourselves in that capacity. We'll save the rest for the discussion groups and all the things that go along with that. But that's the kickoff. I hope you're kind of excited about it, and I hope you've got questions. There's a lot that comes with this. These things have been discussed for centuries, the goods and the bads of them, and there's some challenging aspects of it. We're not scared of those kind of questions. We want to get to truth. We want to stand for God, and that's important. We'll close up with an invitation tonight. Maybe these are things that you have yet to consider. Maybe there's other things that you've got going on in your life as well. We want to be here for you. First and foremost, this is a church family, which means we value people incredibly. You are not just a number. You are not just a person that is filling a pew. You are a real person with a real soul, and it matters. Which means the things that you are going through in life, it matters. The struggles that you're going through, they matter. Each and every one of you. So tonight, if those struggles seem incredible and you're just not sure that you can handle them on your own, please open that up and let the church go through that with you. Tonight, it may be that you've put God off for far too long, and it's the time that you become a Christian. Please don't put that off. Let the church go through that with you. The church is not made up of absolutely perfect people. It's people that's been through struggles, challenging struggles at times. Any of us that get up on a high horse and say we're the most self-righteous people, well, you're on the wrong path of Christianity with that one. And humility, saying we've been through things as well. If we can help you in any way, if we can bear a burden with you in any way, if we can cry with you, if we can love on you, if we can go through the word and look through truth together, please don't hesitate in that. These aren't empty words. We really mean it. You matter. Your soul matters. So if there's a way that we can help you, let us know as we stand and as we sing.